Here we go. Today is Saturday, October 6th, 2018, and this is episode 226 of the Defensive Security Podcast, recording from the lovely DerbyCon in Louisville, Kentucky, along with Mr. Andy Callett.
Hello, Jerry. How are you?
Never better. And we have a live studio audience. It's a much smaller live studio audience than normal, right? So.
Well, we're on the road.
Correct, right. We don't have the stadium with us.
That's true. And, security is a lot tougher to bring on the road with us, so we got a vet who comes in.
Right.
It's complicated.
Exactly.
It's complicated.
Exactly. So, just before we get started, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employer. So joining us are a couple of people who are here at DerbyCon with us. First up is...
Hi, this is Carolina Espinoza.
And?
John Carr.
So yes, I just wanted to take just a couple of minutes at the start and get your feedback on the conference. So, Carolina, what do you think?
Yes, I'm enjoying the conference. Seeing faces that I haven't seen in a while, like from GERCON or from B-Sides Las Vegas. Also meeting new people, either in LobbyCon or HallwayCon. And I'm just enjoying the variety of talks. It's very difficult to choose what to go, listen to.
Have you learned anything?
Is that part of it?
Yeah,
oh, yes.
Yeah. That's...
you probably learned not to come to Jerry's room.
Yes, I learned the secret knock. No, right now I'm focusing on some of the talks that deal with WMI exploitation and PowerShell. So my concern is, me being blue team security analyst, I want to know how to lock down my network and reduce the risk.
So have you picked up anything that is worth sharing?
Yes. Not about that, actually about social engineering.
Okay. What did you learn?
Well, in the social engineering yesterday, I was listening on two calls, and I realized how easy it is to get the person on the other end of the line to do things. If you have the right voice, the right tone, and you're able to make it sound like, oh, I didn't mean to bother you, I just got to get this done. Kind of like create some kind of bonding, with the person on the other line, and the person or persons were able to give away information. And I didn't know that there's points given for everything that can be given away. But what really got me was how easy it was to convince the person to go to a specific website and read off the information on the website. So they were directing the persons to go to bit.ly / and then a specific website. So. And for me, my concern is just to remind users, do some security awareness, to remind them not to click on links, not to enumerate what it is that they have, the software or hardware. If they get any calls like that, just say, I'm busy, and hang up.
So this was during the social engineering contest?
Yes.
Here at the conference? Nice.
Good. And so how about you, John?
Let's see. I learned that I'm getting older and can't stay out as late as I used to. That's one big thing.
As we all are, yes.
Yeah, I also learned that hydration is important. No, this year it's so... I'm really liking where DerbyCon's going this year. They opened up more tickets. So they also have a new venue, which I'm kind of liking also. The interesting part, and we were talking about this a little bit off mic a little bit earlier, is that we're seeing a lot of faces we haven't seen, a lot of faces that we normally would see we're not seeing. So I think actually our experience might be a little bit different. But I know at the last session I was at, about an hour and a half ago, they had everyone raise their hand asking, so who here is for your very first DerbyCon? And half the hands went up. So it's a bigger crowd and a lot of folks who'd never been here before. So that's the thing that surprised me, which I kind of like, actually, just some new blood. I think overall, talks-wise, feels like like you had mentioned, there's a lot of conversations happening this time around about social engineering, which obviously we all know because the defenders are getting better, so now the bad guys are switching now to hacking the human. The other thing I'm seeing finally kind of change and kind of roll over a little bit is a lot more conversations about cloud, which we haven't seen as many, but I think now most companies are dabbling enough in it, especially in the Fortune 500 now, that we're seeing some people talking about post-exploitation techniques and lateral movement within cloud, which we've not seen a lot of those talks in the past. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, the one I guess one observation I had is that there's a lot of it's kind of back to a lot of red team type talks.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Yeah, not a lot of like heavy blue team this time.
Right. So Jason, this is Jason Bell. He's up here from university. So give me your impressions, Jace.
Also known as your son.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that was obvious, but okay.
So yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm not really into any of this at all. However, just from an outsider's standpoint looking in, the fullness of a lot of the talk rooms is giving me the impression that a lot of what the speakers have to talk about are important in the current atmosphere of the industry, and in the sense that they need to be elaborated on either more.
It was an interesting. So it's an interesting interesting point. I've noticed a couple of things about this show. One is the talks seem to be either super full or not at all. Right?
I'm expecting not at all for mine tomorrow.
Well, it's a bad.
We'll do everything we can to make sure it's not as full.
There's an expectation that something's going to happen. So
I've heard.
Yeah.
I mean, this show probably won't be published until that's all, water under the bridge. But
Right. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting to see the things that draw the people in and those that don't. Which, it makes me wonder. Do the conference planners or the speaker, like the CFP reviewers have an idea of which ones are going to be that popular and not when they're actually selecting it. I don't have any idea.
Well, it's an interesting challenge that I think conference organizers have to manage, which the tickets are open to anybody, as they should be.
Right.
And so they don't really know who's going to show up necessarily. And they don't really know what level in the industry they're at, what their interests are, what level of expertise they may have. So they kind of have to make some best guesses of running the gambit of, everybody from new entrants to the industry to folks who've been doing it for 20 years, red team, blue team, purple team, compliance, or just kind of pick a cultural focus for a conference. I think that gets a little interesting, and it's tough to predict. But I think most of the talks I've seen have certainly been interesting, and the topic ranges of talks have been pretty varied, for sure.
I wouldn't mind seeing too, someone to do a little bit of work to see the intersection between who, like the personality, the person doing the talk, versus how many people are showing up. Because I'm sure, in the past, people have talked about this. This made its rounds on Twitter for years and years about the echo chamber of the security community, and there are certain people that they're known. They're the Ed Scotuses, they're the Leslie Carharts that that no matter what they're talking about, they could be reading the dictionary.
Nice
people are going to
dropping.
show up.
Good job.
Well, no, I don't know her, and she doesn't know me. But that's kind of the point I'm making. That there are certain people that have a name in the industry that they could show up and talk about anything, and people are going to show up. So I'm wondering for those ones that are good, heavy technical topics, but people don't know them. I don't know necessarily if they're going to get the turnout right away.
Well, I know that.
Great point.
Yeah, but this particular con does a blind CFP, which is, I think, in general good. But it's interesting because they're picking talks based purely on the abstract or the outline of the content, and not necessarily on the skill set of the presenter as a presenter. And I think, I don't know a better way to do it, by the way. I'm not saying we should do it any other way, but I think you can get some folks who are amazing presenters present an interesting and entertaining talk on a lame subject, and vice versa. Right? You could have somebody who's an amazing topic, but not a very good presenter, and these are two different skill sets we're trying to find the intersection of.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Indeed. And so tomorrow, on the last day, you are giving a talk.
I am. I'm at, well, I'm sure nobody will hear us before it happens, but 2 p.m. Sunday on, kind of shifting our mindset from technical to psychological defenses. And it's a very updated version of the talk I gave in Bogota earlier this year. And I was very happy to be selected. So the only challenge is that it's the last slot on the last day. So I'm hoping folks are still here, because a lot of folks leave early on Sunday.
Yeah, indeed. So thank you to everyone who is here in the room with us. And now,
and I also want to point out that you're not actually.
I am not speaking. That's correct. And just so everyone is aware, Mr. Callett has a speaker badge, and I do not. And I have, I've heard about this, I don't know, maybe 30 times so far. Today, yeah. And it's early yet.
It is.
Yeah. So
carry on.
Anyway, so moving on, we're going to talk about our stories now. And first up is a story from Tripwire, and the title here is BEC as a Service offers hacked business accounts for as little as $150.
Which, in some ways is probably quicker and easier than trying to, get a new account provision with my own company.
Well, that's a good point, right? I mean, it could be economical, right?
It's kind of
for new hires.
It's kind of like a cloud service,
right?
Just saying. Carry on.
IAM, managed IAM, right? So the it's an interesting article that ties in a bunch of different data points, but one of the most interesting aspects was highlighted in the title of the article here is the fact that there's an economy growing up around business email compromise. And so the point is, if you have a need to get into a target, get into a victim company, you don't necessarily have to go through all the dirty work to compromise them yourself. I mean, it's almost like Mechanical Turk for bad guys, right? It's someone will go do the, and it's not, by the way, fundamentally different than the like the exploit kit economy that's grown up.
Well, it's very results oriented.
Correct.
It's on demand.
It's on demand, and it's pay for results.
It's part of the gig economy. Just saying.
I can't argue with that.
So the idea being basically I can contract with one of these services, say I need an email account in company XYZ,
right,
and pay them upon delivery.
Correct. And so as we've talked about in the past, one of the big challenges with business email compromise, and by the way, that like there's a couple of reasons why an adversary may want an account. One is they want to retrieve the information that's in an email account. Another one might be that they want to use that account, as we've seen in a lot of financial fraud, business email compromise cases. They want to compromise the CEO's email account and then send an email requesting funds to purchase a customer or a company to the CFO, and that ends up pocketing the bad guys a whole bunch of money, and probably many other things in between. And I would say when you start thinking about this particular scenario, it becomes difficult to defend against, because a lot of the traditional stuff, like maybe marking the subject line as having the email coming from an outside source, doesn't really work, because for all intents and purposes, it is the CEO. It's the CEO's account who has sent the email.
Yeah, it could be digitally signed.
Right.
Because that happens automatically internally. A lot of the trust is already there implicitly.
Correct. And so that says that, it especially around certain key processes, like, for instance, fund transfers and things like that are both susceptible and targeted, by the bad guys, really makes sense to develop a process. Like maybe you have to verbally confirm, and by the way, that's not even a great.
You almost have to, because I talk about this a little bit in my talk tomorrow, and it's something we've talked about. You probably need a couple of points of verification to really trust it. So,
right.
Maybe 2 directors or 3 director level folks in the company verifying over $1 million, and have a process and a policy that no matter how urgent or important it is said to be by the quote unquote CEO in email, you don't violate the process.
Right.
Now, the flip side of that is it slows down your flexibility and it slows down business when you build these unskippable or unavoidable process.
Correct. And it's also, I also have to imagine it's uncomfortable for an employee, let's say finance or accounting type employee, to get an email from the CEO saying, look, you got to do this or you're going to get fired. And it's actually coming from the CEO's real account, right?
That authority figure is very powerful.
That's tough.
But I would say too, part of the training you would probably need to do in there as well is training those executives that they aren't doing by matter of their actual business process what looks like the bad thing. Because we've all seen this. Well, the M&A activity happens all the time, and in those cases, sometimes it's going to happen under the radar, especially if it's a private company. And at that point, the owner or the CEO is going to send a note to the CFO saying, we need to get something moving on this. Please keep this under your hat. Please wire this money. Blah blah blah. And that's actually a business process. So when you get something like this as the CFO, it doesn't look wrong, and it's really easy to subvert all these different controls you put in place, because that's exactly what happens if it's a legit request.
Thanks, John. I kind of forgot you were here.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm here to remind you.
No,
I'll be sitting up front to heckle you the entire time.
It's a good point, and I would kind of where I thought we were going, and I'll go there now, is making sure that the CEO doesn't drive bad behavior, right? So, if you build a process that says, you have to have multiple, different levels or different forms of authentication in order to handle that kind of transaction, and then the CEO actually, storms down into the accounting office and says, "God damn it, how come you didn't? You're delaying this." That kind of perpetuates the vulnerability to this.
Yes, there is a vulnerability and a high risk. This week I found out of a company that almost wired $3 million. And this company has a security team, a top-level security team. And so, yes, it can happen. And so you're right. So having 2 or 3 checkpoints or people verifying the amount after over a certain amount. Also, reviewing the invoices. I'm doing some research so I can prepare presentations so that we can train our staff on what to look for in business email compromise. This week I was reviewing an invoice for about $1,500, and I was checking the website. I was checking to see is the domain name valid? Is the website built out? If I call the 800 number, not the number in the email or in the invoice, is it, does someone pick up? Is there an operator? Is there recording? Do they have a directory? I double checked the rep. So still, I would imagine that for business email compromise, there are teams who have everything all built out already. I mean, they're thinking of all these things and really doing a deep background, a deep check, and making sure that everything is all set in case someone does that, like we did.
Yeah, and I think if we take it back to the basics too, hardening the ability for the bad guys to even get the account, multi-factor off, not necessarily exposing those logins to the internet, making them come in through some sort of VPN, monitoring where people are logging in from. Suddenly people are logging in from Belarus and they're not supposed to, triggering that.
Right.
There's a lot of things we can do to keep them from getting in initially. But some of those things are a hassle, especially for executives. They may not want to deal with multi-factor authentication. We've got to convince them that it's worth the extra effort. Or they may not want to deal with having to log into the VPN first to get to their email. They just want it on their phone all the time. So that's sometimes a cultural challenge. to keep these things more secure.
Yeah, indeed, and I think there's a headwind running against us now with a lot of the cloud-based email. There used to be, I would say, slightly higher hurdle that adversaries would have to get through. I mean, first they would have to get into your network in order to get to your email. Well, now that's not necessarily true. If you're using Outlook 365 or Gmail or one of those other providers, which by the way is becoming more of the norm, this becomes a more complicated problem. Although I think we're seeing, we're starting to see movements from companies like Microsoft, who are trying to focus more on multi-factor authentication, and they're deprecating kind of the traditional password, to hopefully negate some of that new risk that we're incurring by moving to the cloud. So, anyhow, moving on to the next story. This one comes from bleepingcomputer.com. The title is IC3, that, by the way, is the Internet Crime Complaint Center, issues alert regarding remote desktop protocol attacks. This is...
Oddly enough, it doesn't mention WordPress.
It does not.
It means actual RDP.
It means actual RDP. Right. Yeah, so we've seen, I would say, I'm trying to remember the first time I actually saw this as a problem, and I mean, it kind of goes back as far as I can remember in my IT career.
Don't look at me.
Oh my.
I think for IT departments, it's balancing control versus comfort. I know for a lot of sysadmins, it's so convenient. It's great. You can RDP right from your workstation to the servers in the data center, whether they're physically on site somewhere or off site at a data center. And I can't live without it. I really need it. So these types of attacks are a concern for us, and there's only so much that we can do, because then it affects our ability to administrate the servers.
Well, it is a little. I think it's a nuanced problem, because on the one hand, you've this typically is an issue where you have exposed like RDP services exposed to the internet. And that happens for lots of different reasons, but in general, you're right. I mean, if you're gonna administer Windows servers in a lights out data center or a cloud environment, or whatever, you're gonna use RDP. I mean, that's the way it works. Or you're gonna do things to, use PowerShell commands across the network or whatnot. But RDP is, I would say, certainly the most common way. But the challenge is, as we've seen in a lot of cases, and I think there was just a port in California, I forget the name of the port, was shut down as a result of a ransomware attack, which, again, I think it may have been SamSam. The allegation was that it was the same thing that attacked, or that hit the city of Atlanta, which was SamSam. And, the common point of origin of all these things is open RDP.
Right. And what's interesting from this story, too, is they're finding that a number of criminal marketplaces are populated with very inexpensive access to these. So as little as $6, and you can buy an RDP account on a target machine and get in. So clearly there's a whole lot of folks who are leaving RDP exposed to the internet in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and then not only that, they're leaving it exposed, and then there's some other vulnerability. I mean, it's by itself doesn't offer access. It has to be paired with a weak password or some vulnerability or what have you. But there's no net. It's
right. Like Shodan was able to index over 2 million computers running RDP that's directly open to the internet.
Yeah. On the default port.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I gotta admit is really scary.
Yeah.
It's probably not something we should be doing, especially because once you get that foothold, there's so many more things you can do.
Right.
That is... So for $5 to $10, I can get a foothold in some company. I mean, I can then go to town with whatever.
Right.
If I get RDP
right.
access, most likely.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like the sky's the limit, right? Once you have that kind of access, the sky's the limit. I mean, obviously, you don't know what permissions the account will have, but there's many elevation.
If they're leaving RDP open to the internet, probably tells me they don't have the best security hygiene as an organization in general.
And there's probably two ways of looking at it too. There are probably, and I haven't dug into the numbers that are in the article, but there are the folks who set up the equivalent of small business server, which is going to automatically open up RDP, and then there's folks who are setting up. We'll go back to talking about cloud, set up cloud services, and that could be potentially every single host they have out there. Like every EC2 instance has just got. Is wide open because they didn't lock it down properly because they didn't know how to. And suddenly you have, the one entry point where you get small business server or whatever else, and you have the entire infrastructure wide open via RDP.
Right. And I think we see this a lot with some of the, I don't know what the right term is, the managed service providers for things like point of sale, terminals, gas pumps, and many other things where the provider comes and drops a server at the gas station or at the store or what have you and plugs it into the internet, and they use RDP to connect to it. I was in an office building recently, and they had one of those kind of self-checkout cafeteria things, right? It had a kiosk, and the kiosk was very clearly managed by RDP, and I don't have any particular insight on whether that was a bad thing or not, but in that case, but I think this is a really common issue.
RDP is an incredibly useful tool.
Absolutely.
So I think it's more a matter of using it wisely and securing it, as opposed to just saying don't use it.
I remember reading an article on Motherboard regarding a top voting machine vendor who admitted to installing remote access software on their machines.
Well, hey, you got to get into.
Got to get the votes.
You got to get in to manage it and get the votes off the machine. And when it breaks or something, you don't want to have to dispatch a person to the site if you can just log in remotely and do whatever is needed to fix it. So they offer the DHS and US CERT offer some and the IC3. Offer some recommendations, things like moving RDP to a different port, but realistically, that's of limited
Isn't that
utility. Well, it is, but at the same time, you can't easily get it by just running a Shodan query, right? So, I mean, it incrementally elevates the complexity, but doesn't change any of the fundamentals.
Right.
It's a very, very thin layer of the onion.
They not exposing RDP service to the internet is probably the most important recommendation they make. But that's a hard thing to do, especially as our environments become more and more federated out to different cloud providers, like you had said, and
move into the quote unquote zero trust model.
Right.
We're going to have those sorts of things open.
Right.
So then it becomes about hardening them.
Yeah, and so one of the things that and by the way, I kind of reject the notion that RDP in a zero trust model should be open to everywhere. I know that there are some militant zero trust purists who think that we shouldn't rely on network type controls at all, and I'm not sure that's a winning strategy. But we got to find the right balance, and one of the things that I think is appropriate is to try to draw a box around your environment and then do your own Shodan query, right? Figure out for yourself. You should not have any of this stuff exposed to the internet, right? But you're not going to know if you're not scanning for it.
Or do something like port knocking, where you do something that opens it up temporarily for the IP address you're coming from.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
there's all sorts of options there.
Right. Right.
So it's not just wide open all day long for anybody to pound on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They recommend using strong passwords and multi-factor authentication. That hopefully is, pretty apparent and obvious, enabling account lockout policies. By the way, the one thing that I see, actually I should say I don't see, which I really hope to see, is not only account lockouts, but being notified that an account has been locked out.
Well, typically you know when you try to log in.
Here's the thing about account lockout policies. You have to set it at a good number. So, for example, it should be 3 or 5, but not 24, 50, or infinite.
True, but I think
and have an auto timeout so it doesn't get used against you.
Yeah, so that's the key right there.
Or get clever and lock into that IP.
Yes,
depending on what your capabilities are.
Correct.
Because otherwise, somebody could just keep you from accessing your own stuff by just.
It's an effective denial of service if you just like lock an account out after 5 tries, whatever. Like you can go and lock out all the domain admins, right? Mm-hmm. And then go to town. Like that's not a great thing either. The one thing that seems to work pretty well, and I think it's native in Windows and some other operating systems, is you can kind of do this exponential, time delay. So after a couple of failed logins, it takes a while before you can try again, and then if you fail again, it takes even longer. And so you're not completely locked out, but at the same time you are effectively blocking the brute force for all intents and purposes. But the thing that I think in general IT departments and security departments don't really take advantage of is like when that happens, alert on it, right? Especially, by the way, if that's an internal system, right? Like I can't tell you how many times I've worked on an incident where, in the aftermath, you look at the forensic, you look at the what was happening on the system, and accounts were just repeatedly being locked out because there was an adversary on the network, trying to brute force. And no one knew. No one paid attention because they weren't looking, and that's ridiculous. So,
well, and the other thing I would say is, assuming we're not in a cloud environment, organizations should be scanning from the internet their IP ranges to see what's open, so something doesn't sneak out there inadvertently because mistakes happen.
Correct, absolutely. And and by the way, you touched on an interesting point. Cloud environments are difficult.
Yeah.
From an IT inventory perspective, right? Because you don't know, it's really easy to spin things up and shut things down. And we were talking about some of this stuff earlier. Like, part of your strategy, like just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't need to know about it. You should know about it. And I think there's most all cloud providers give you the tools you would need to know what IP addresses you're using at any given time, and that there should be some kind of an automatic feed that lets you give you some awareness of that, so you can feed that into your scanners or what have you. So use that stuff. They talk about enabling audit records of logins, which by the way is really important. Like when your system gets compromised, not only that, but shuttle those logs somewhere else, because I cannot tell you how many times we worked on an incident and the logs are gone. Because, what does the bad guy do once they get on a system?
Delete the logs.
They delete the logs. And how many companies, and I'm really getting worked up here, do not move their logs off of the system? It's infuriating.
Jerry's actually turning red.
He actually is.
I
do you
can
want a hug?
second that.
I'm getting mad. I'm getting very
Jerry,
mad.
how do you feel about Active Directory?
And then install security updates. Patch your crap. All right. Moving on to the last story. Okay.
The logs are coming from inside the house.
The title here is Supply Chain Security is the Whole Enchilada, but who's willing to pay for it? This comes from Krebs on Security, and it's a super long article about the recent kind of what has been described by Krebs here as a bombshell report by Bloomberg that super micro motherboard server motherboards. I guess I don't know if it's all of them or some of them, though. At least minimally, the allegation is those used by Apple and Amazon for AWS had a grain of rice sized microchip implanted on the motherboard, and the allegation further is that this microchip was intended to do a very, very specific thing. Upon boot, it was supposed to inject some code that told the kernel to go to an outside source to get some further instruction. So it wasn't like it had its own, massive amount of malware and whatnot. But point was, it was this persistent thing was baked into the motherboard that you couldn't get rid of, and the
Now, and it wasn't just Supermicro doing this; it was being done by intelligence agencies, supposedly.
Correct, because Supermicro's motherboards were made in China,
Right?
And correct. It wasn't that Supermicro was doing it. It was that it was being done to Supermicro motherboards.
And right off the bat, let's also point out that everybody and their brother is denying this story.
Correct. So there's Amazon notably has come out with a public statement and a blog post, basically saying that, and I think this was part of the story, and there's a whole lot of arms and legs to the story, but part of the story apparently originated because Amazon bought a company who used Supermicro motherboards, and so they had allegedly engaged a third-party hardware tester in Canada to take a look at these motherboards. And so that's kind of where the story seems to diverge from, like the stories diverge from each other, because the Bloomberg report basically says that the testing agency or company identified this chip. And by the way, there's actually a picture running around the internet of a Supermicro motherboard with this chip on it, which by the way is not real. It's a artist's rendering of what the motherboard would look like if the chip were there, and a lot of people seem to be confused that it's not actually real. So that's an important thing.
You see how these things take off.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, it's Bloomberg, right? So
Right.
it's not like
It's a credible source in theory. And they're doubling down. After the initial denials came out from Apple, Supermicro, and Amazon, Bloomberg came out and said, no, we stand by our story.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, Bloomberg has like an army of fact checkers, and
Right.
so there's, at least if nothing else, there's the assumption a lot of times if you see it in Bloomberg, it's likely true. Not to say maybe it was in this case, but I mean, Bloomberg doesn't play.
Oh, I completely agree. That's been the position of certainly a lot of people that I've come in contact with. That they're making the assumption Bloomberg knows what they're talking about.
So I think you were going to, didn't Apple or Amazon divest a company in China because they thought that these motherboards were compromised? That's part of the story.
Yeah, I maybe so, but I hadn't gotten
There's
to that
so
point.
many weird things rolling around on this one. At the moment, it's kind of tough to know what's real
Right.
and what's alleged.
Right. So I would net it out like this. Amazon says that they in fact did engage a testing company to look at the product that used the Supermicro motherboard, and they did find some things, but none of them were related to like a chip. They said their characterization was, anytime you send a device to a testing company like this, they find things that are suboptimal, some recommendations on improvements, minor stuff, and Amazon claims that they kind of fed that back into the supply chain, and they were all fixed, and none of them were of the caliber that's being described here. But apparently the Bloomberg sources appear to be intelligence agencies, and I kind of wonder, by the way, if possibly everybody's correct.
Well, here's my thought. If this existed, why have these organizations not detected this rogue outbound communication to a CNC server?
Well, so I absolutely thought I'm thinking on that same thought process, but here's here's kind of where I'm going, and I know this is complete hypothetical speculation, but we don't know. So the allegations from the Bloomberg story appear to come from unnamed intelligence sources, right? And we don't know who they are or what they know or what have you. But it seems plausible, given what we saw, 4 or 5 years ago with the Snowden leaks, right? That certain like Cisco routers and whatnot were being intercepted by the NSA, and they were putting hardware implants into the devices. I mean, that concept could be playing out here, and so point is, maybe there are some number of Supermicro motherboards that have been altered. The one, and that in general, that maybe they're not. I mean, it seems possible to me that both are true. Like that the system that Amazon sent to be tested in Canada didn't have the microchip, and that maybe some of them actually do because they were being intercepted, kind of like the NSA did by Chinese or who the Luxembourg
right.
intelligence service.
Right. So let's say, for instance, that this is real. And we'll just make that assumption. And that Apple and Amazon are aware. Maybe they've been notified. Maybe they have cooperated with investigators.
Right.
And perhaps the U.S. government has said, hey, keep quiet. Or maybe not. Let's say they're not under a gag order or not under a denial order. Why do you think these organizations, if this was true, would be denying this? When we've already got a certain basis of plausible air cover under the concept of nation-state attacks like this are nearly impossible to stop, so they're not necessarily getting hit by a negative perception for getting hit by this.
Yeah.
So why deny it?
Yeah, and and that's one of the points that Krebs raises in his post is that the way in which Amazon and Apple denounced it or denied it, they don't have any room to backtrack. That was his characterization. They can't. The way they did it, they can't. There doesn't appear to be any wiggle room in their denial, and I think you're absolutely on a good point. Like, they could just say, you know what, you're right. Maybe it did happen, and we'll double down on our supply chain security, or what have you. But they're not doing that.
Yeah, it's almost like, how can they prove the negative? How can they prove that this has never happened on any device that's ever come into the organization?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, right? And they can't, right?
And again, I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know what to believe at this point. It's very interesting to watch play out. I guess we'll have to, see. I will tell you, there's probably a whole lot of other people ripping apart their Supermicro supplies looking for unannounced or unexpected components on their motherboards.
Right.
Well, and that's that's one thing I was thinking about is I haven't received a single email yet from a vendor in the past 2 days, which I was expecting. It's already been 2 days. I'm expecting an email from a vendor saying, "Do you have anything from Supermicro? You should contact us to search your motherboards." I mean, honestly, this is a cottage industry. If there's an entrepreneur listening, seriously, $3.50 an hour, offer to call up every single company that you know and ask this question and just hit the news. So now everybody's panicking. But on the other side of it too, any of us who are doing anything in security, which is everyone who's listening, we're going to start getting these emails pretty soon, or these letters from our partners and vendors asking to attest whether or not we have Supermicro devices,
right?
Whether or not we've had them checked out, and it's a whole flurry of scary.
Or they're going to add new feature to our endpoint security suite to detect this sort of communication.
I think what John was mentioning is right on. Like with anytime there's a new struts vulnerability or whatever, we get a flurry of, usually from customers, right, saying, have you fixed struts everywhere?
Well, we also get a flurry from salespeople.
Well, yeah, no, I know we get it from both ends, right? But yeah, I mean, and by the way, when customers come asking about that, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, you can say yes, I have Supermicro motherboards, or no, I don't. And if I don't, well, it's a very easy answer. But like, if you do, you can't lie. That's unethical. And what do you do? Like, you pull out that crappy, faux picture that was edited and go look at, open up all your servers and say, oh, nope, that doesn't have the grain of rice. Nope, that one doesn't have it either. What do you do?
What about insurance companies who add a rider asking, oh, do you have this list of products on your network? And if you do, it's an extra X amount of dollars.
Right. I don't know if that happens or not, but you're right. That would be interesting.
So circling back slightly, just to be clear, when we're talking Apple, we're not just talking like their products. We're talking their internal IT infrastructure.
Yeah, like the stuff that I'm assuming.
Right.
That I'm assuming it's the stuff that like maybe runs iTunes or iCloud or kind of the back end stuff, or maybe it's their financial system, and we don't really know.
But not like iPhones and iPads.
Correct. It's
home speakers.
Correct. I don't know. I don't think Supermicro has motherboards
Siri.
inside your iPad.
Yes, but that changes.
Well, Siri, right? Absolutely.
Think about this for a moment. If it was getting into IoT devices or home devices, now we're taking away from the concept of a bastion of a network security environment that may be able to stop or spot this sort of exfiltration data. It's on my phone. I'm certainly not going to know that.
Right.
Which, I'm not suggesting that's what this story is about, but it's interesting to think, what if it migrated to that level? And it's a whole different set of nightmares.
Yeah.
I blame John for.
Well, that's what I do. Mm-hmm. I would expect anybody who works in a company that has or that currently does or has done any sort of government contracts is going to have a bad couple months, because the folks are going to be asking like crazy from inside and from the outside. And I feel bad because, like you said, would I know exactly the grain of rice I'm looking for? Am I trained to find that exact thing?
And is this real?
Right.
Or am I wasting a lot of cycles on a misunderstood situation?
Exactly. We don't know that it's real. And that's one thing that drives me insane about this is,
Well, I think, for good or ill, now that this has gone public, if it's real, I think there's a high likelihood third parties independently will verify this to get a name for themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right.
This is too popular.
I think you're right.
There's too much publicity around there for a third party not to come out and say, oh, by the way, we found it. Would you like to hire our services? So, I don't know. Part of me says if this isn't independently verified within the next 30 days, it's less likely to be real.
Yeah, regardless of, and I agree completely with that point, but regardless, we know what's going to be at DEF CON and Black Hat next year. There's going to be proof of concepts of people soldering crappy, Raspberry Pi stuff to server motherboards to,
Isn't what the ILO port is?
No,
same thing.
No. I mean, people are going to try to make that real. They're like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's see how we can actually go do that. It probably won't be a grain of sand or grain of rice size thing, but look, we're going to see it next year. And by the way, I just gave a lot of people a research idea, so
this is
put
John's business idea. That's the kind of value we provide on this podcast.
That's right. Someone's going to get rich on this.
For the record, John does not speak for the podcast, the owners of the podcast, Jerry's dog, me.
The affiliates of the podcast, the
llamas.
Yes, any llama anywhere, or the DefSec Stadium.
Anyone who's ever donated to the podcast.
Or Patreon.
Right.
Right.
Or anyone alive today. Really, we're just going to say.
Or any of the ISPs that carry network traffic.
So
anywhere.
So don't sue us for John's utterings.
Man, I come out here once and I stink up the place. Man.
I didn't want to have to tell you like this.
All right.
For the record, I've known John about 74 years. So,
yeah. Pretty excited.
It's all good nature.
Probably probably only 73.
Fair.
We've already established I don't look a day over 94, and I'm pretty proud of that.
He does lots of Tai Chi.
Lots of Tai Chi. Well, one last point I did want to make about that. Okay.
No.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead, John.
Well, just going back to the thing you said and earlier, Andy, is the thing that has not been said so far, and maybe it was in the article because I only made it through part of it, is
Way to prep.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, I didn't know until 5 minutes before this I was gonna have a mic in front of my face. But like,
Way to prep, Jerry.
Okay.
Podcast
well,
professional.
at least I saw you reading the articles for once.
I'll
So
own
thanks,
it.
Andy,
I own it.
for showing up.
I own that one.
What I was going to say, though, is that what hasn't been said yet is, like, what motherboard is not made in China at this point? And everyone's pointing out Supermicro, but really
That's a
the
great point.
question is, like, what hardware coming out of China, which is every single piece of hardware, doesn't have potentially something like this?
Correct. Yeah, and by the way, I've seen a growing backlash against Lenovo.
Well,
Well, they did to themselves.
Well, that happened right when IBM sold them.
Right.
There
No,
was,
I mean there's been within the last 6 months.
No, yeah,
renewed.
I agree.
Yeah.
Renewed. But I remember when IBM spun off ThinkPad.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone was like,
Absolutely.
"No, they're Chinese spies.
Right,
Don't buy them."
right, and they're made in the same place,
Right.
pretty much. I think. I mean, I don't know for sure. But yeah, that's a good point. And by the way, I can't remember where I read it, but one of the points was if for instance the Chinese government wanted to do something like this, it would be far more effective to actually bake those implants into the silicone of a microchip, of a
Jerry,
microprocessor.
Why are you giving them hints?
I don't know.
You know, the entire senior leadership of the Chinese military listens to this podcast.
true.
Jerry, who do you work for?
That's a very good question.
Who's that weird Asian man staying at the house?
Suddenly, the podcast got very racist. Jerry's son Jason does not speak for the podcast, its sponsors,
Or for John.
My dog. Yes. All right. Well,
you
Or for Carolina.
right.
Or for my dog.
But I think this is an interesting boogeyman, right? This
Yes.
is some witchcraft type level stuff that is really tough to disprove once this thought
Exactly.
process is out there.
exactly.
And you could take it to the next step of how do we know Intel or AMD or whomever doesn't sneak some stuff into the dies of their main CPUs.
So I see another potential business. Certificates, manufacturing certificates. It's guaranteed that it was made at a particular place, following the blueprints with change orders.
blockchain.
Blockchain. I was thinking the same thing.
What's blockchain?
It's going to save the world. That's what it's going to do.
When is the ICO? That's what I want to know. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I think there are some certifications already, but still,
But you still have to trust.
yeah, right. I mean, the
That
problem is
vendor.
these like computers, especially like the system on a chip type thing that you have in your phone and your iPad. And
Now, are we
whatnot.
talking Ruffles? Are we talking tortilla chip?
I like the
Ruffles,
For those who don't know,
whatever.
this is my lovely wife, Emily, who's sitting next to me, who never even got a chance to speak. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, y'all.
There you go.
That is not her accent, but she's an actor. So apparently she's from now South Carolina
There you go.
or Savannah. Good Southern girl. Anyway, sorry, completely off topic.
We've lost this whole
So, system on a
episode.
chip,
Yeah,
not
system on a
Ruffles.
chip. Even like x86 and chipsets on motherboards. I mean, these things have hundreds of millions, sometimes multiple billions, tens of billions of transistors. They are ungodly complex, and it is not out of the realm of possibility to to design them in kind of post design pre-manufacture of the microprocessor. It's not out of the realm of possibility. If you have you have a sufficiently advanced adversary. But your point is, and I agree with this, like we can keep creating boogeymen, right? We can keep playing this out
and boogie women
okay, fair enough. Boogie people. All right, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to offend anyone.
Should be.
Didn't mean to offend anyone. Boogie people. Seems a little weird to me.
At some point you gotta trust something, or you drive yourself crazy.
Right, or you're back to Etch a Sketches.
Right. Or 3270 terminals connected to a mainframe you coded and built yourself.
All I'm saying is we didn't have phishing problems and drive-by malware infections when we were on green screen. I'm just going to leave that there.
Okay.
That's true. On the ENIAC.
Good idea. Let's go back to AS400.
Yeah.
Wow, we are old.
So anyway, that is the show for this week. Mercifully, we're going to end it here.
Well, one really quick thing.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We never asked you your impressions and thoughts of DerbyCon when you were asking everybody else, putting everybody else on the spot. Like the mean old man.
Well, so my thought is a couple things. One is
so that's the show. Thanks everybody for listening.
Wow, what a jerk!
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm gonna edit that out.
No, I'm going to leave that in so people know what I have to work with here.
Oh, I think they know.
So I like I said earlier, I think it's heavily red team. And by the way, I'm not opposed, and I'm actually a big supporter of blue team people being exposed to red team tactics. I actually think that's a really important concept, because if you don't understand, I can't tell you how many times I've worked on breaches where the IT administration and the architects and the design people had no idea. Like, when I'm explaining what happened, they had no conception that could happen. That those
witchcraft.
Yeah, right. It is witchcraft. But it's not, and so you don't get that perspective until you really understand the types of techniques that adversaries are using, and so I think that's valuable. But there's not a lot of solutions. It's like the one problem, and I think we talked about this in years past. Like you come into this conference and you got 100 problems, and you leave and you got 120 problems. And
Trevor ain't one.
One of them.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
R.I.P. my boy Trevor.
So that's one. I think it is becoming the demographics of the conference are much different. I mean, not necessarily visually different, but like I'm just seeing lots of people that I've never seen before, which is good. I think the new venue is quite nice. It's a little more open and airy, and things are spread out a little more. And there's actually room for more things. Like there's the mental wellness thing, which is really cool. That's Amanda.
Shout out to Amanda Berlin for spinning that up.
Yeah, it was really cool.
I was the name dropper.
Well, Kanye told me to kind of cut it back. So
nice. They had the car hacking village, hardware hacking village,
the SE village,
the SE village, two different a couple different CTFs. They had the IoT CTF, and then the actual SC CTF, and then the normal kind of technical CTF,
and Vanilla Ice,
and the Offspring.
And we invited Vanilla Ice on the show. He never replied.
Yeah, he said he had something to do. He had to wash his cat or something. It was weird. I don't know.
Okay, we get it. We're completely off the rails.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks everyone for listening, and thank you to everyone here for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate the ask.
Absolutely.
So my talk, which I'll be giving tomorrow, should end up on YouTube. Iron Geek is doing all the recording, so if you're interested, check it out. Hopefully by the next show, I'll have a link we can put in the show notes, but I don't know what it will be yet.
A lot of the talks from yesterday are already online.
Yeah,
So probably by the time you're on the plane or by sort of driving home, they'll probably be up there
depending
already.
on when I have a chance to release this, I will, if I can, I will include it in the show notes when I release it. If I can't, I'll add it to the show notes afterwards on the website. So I can't go back and edit the MP3 file that you already downloaded because that would be creepy. But it would be cool if I could.
Supposedly we can't.
Supposedly. Yeah, there's that chip that there's that one chip we implanted, right? Yeah. Anyhow, thanks everyone. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.